Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Do you love sci-fi? Are you a horror fan? Maybe you prefer action or fantasy. 2000 AD has it all and should be on your radar. With a whole universe of characters from Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog to Rogue Trooper, Shakara Halo Jones, and many more, every weekly issue you get 5 action-packed thrills from incredible creators such as Garth Ennis, Rob Williams, Alex DeCampi, Dan Abnett, and so many others. Get a print subscription and it'll arrive to your door every week. And your first issue is free, or subscribe digitally. Get free back issues and download DRM-free copies of every issue for just $9 a month. That's 128 pages of incredible comics every month for less than $10. That's like a whole graphic novel's worth. All subscribers get amazing offers like discount vouchers and exclusive product offers. Head to 2000ad.com and click on subscribe now, or download the 2000AD app. And why wait? Start reading today. I'll put links in the show notes for you.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Yeti's Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Jimmy Gasparo, and I am very excited for today's episode. This writer has played in a lot of sandboxes, whether or not it's Doctor Who, Star Wars, Teen Titans, Black Adam, Transformers, and Back to the Future, Vikings, Pacific Rim, Sherlock Holmes. He's written several miniseries for Marvel. He has also had a bunch of creator-owned series like Shadow Service, Sleep Terrors, The Ward, and Dead Seas. Well, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. First and foremost, though, his newest Marvel miniseries, Iron and Frost, issue number 1 is coming out October 15th. Please welcome to the podcast, Cavan Scott. Cavan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm quite tired just hearing everything I've worked on. I might just have to go and have a sit down. It's the weird thing is you work. I've been doing this a while, and you do work on a lot of things, and I've been very fortunate to work on a lot of things. It's only when you hear someone reeling them back, you go, "Oh heavens, that's been a minute." But yeah, no, it's I basically say my to-do list has stayed the same as when I was 10. And it hasn't really changed ever since. So I'm all for that.
For listeners who don't know, it's not just a lot of different things that you have done, but it's also not just comics. It's novels. It's audio plays. I know that I think have worked on stuff to try and pitch for television with George Mann and done screenwriting. So it's a whole host of things that you are involved in. Also, the fun of getting ready for an interview like this is I discover little things that I just had no idea. Having read some of the comics you worked on before, I came across something that you had edited for Country File, which is a magazine that you had started. If listeners don't know, it's off of a popular, I think, BBC program, but I came across Great British Walks, 100 unique walks in Britain that you edited that. So I thought
my career
that was
is
great.
just like, I need a map to things do actually link up if you take a step back and look at everything, and it all makes sense. But yeah, when you pull out individual things, it was earlier on we were watching a natural history program on the telly, and it was about this bird called the bittern in the UK, which has this booming noise it makes. And just before they said it, I went, "Oh, the bittern makes this booming noise," and they said it, and my wife said, "How do you know that?" I was like, "We remember I used to work in rural telly." It's like, so I've done all this stuff. And yeah, it's like all these sort of past lives sometimes come crashing back together again. It's weird.
It seems out of all the stuff that you have done, though, you have really been, I would say, fortunate enough to work in all of these things that you've talked about before that you loved growing up. I mean, I imagine I can kind of see, where you're behind you. It looks like along the top of your.
This is my brain on shelves, basically. Yeah.
My eyesight is not as good as it once was, but it looks like across the top of that bookshelf are like many different Daleks.
Dark. I mean, Doctor Who was I'm British, as you could probably tell from the accent. So growing up in Britain in the 1970s, you had to like Doctor Who. It was part of the Constitution. We don't actually have a written Constitution other than the fact you had to watch Doctor Who in the 70s. It was huge. It was everywhere. And it was my gateway into so many things. It was my gateway into a lot of comics. It was my gateway into a lot of different genres and fiction and horror and science fiction, fantasy. And it's always been a massive part of who I am. You know, it's probably my first fandom. It was my first job working in creative writing was on Doctor Who, which I was very fortunate to do. In the period of time, for people that don't know, the TV show ran from 1963 to 1989. Then it had a wilderness years, much like Star Wars, when nothing was really happening. But actually, everything was happening because there were books, there were comics, there were audio dramas, and the fans basically, the lunatics took over the asylum. The fans started producing stuff and getting licenses from the BBC because the BBC didn't think anyone would want to make Doctor Who again, so they were giving out licenses to people. And I had the chance, a group of people I knew were putting together an audio drama company to get all the original Doctors back and all the original assistants and companions and do new stories. And so me and a friend who were working on a magazine at the time just pitched some stories because it was like, well, why not? You know, it was my first ever published work was fan fiction in a Doctor Who fanzine. So we didn't call it fan fiction in those days, but that's exactly what it was. And so that led me to sort of pitch one of those ideas, get it accepted in a way that probably could never happen anymore, which is, you know, being incredibly fortunate being in that period of time, and find myself in my first professional creative writing job, writing for one of the actors I used to watch on Saturday evenings, literally sitting at my grandma's feet, watching, you know, Doctor Who, fight Daleks and Cybermen and all those kind of things. And that was my first gig, was to write for that actor, Colin Baker, you know, fighting monsters, fighting vampires in that case. So it was an incredibly fortunate bit of timing that sort of led me to leap into this world from the sort of magazine world which I'd started in.
Colin Baker, is that? Oh, look, I'm gonna try and test my Doctor Who knowledge. I'm not as good as you, Cavin. But is that the Fifth Doctor?
Sixth Doctor. So
Sixth
Colin
Doctor.
Baker was the one with the dreadful taste in clothes. It was all sort of a patchwork cloak of all different colours, big mop of curly hair, big booming voice. So he was probably, I mean, my doctor was Tom Baker growing up, but you know, by the
Okay.
time Colin was around, that's when I was getting into fandom, and that's when I was discovering that there were comics to do with Doctor Who and all these different kinds of things as well, and meeting other fans. And so Colin's era is very important to me because I sort of went from being someone who watched Doctor Who to someone realizing that fandom existed, and so started to, you know, write fan fiction, meet people, send stuff off to fanzines. I mean, back in the day of like people, you know, I think now actually podcasting and YouTube and everything is the modern day fanzine. It's like, you know, when I was growing up, a lot of the time, you sent off an envelope with a stamp on it, and you got back this photocopied fanzine that fans had put together of short stories and analyzing episodes and that kind of thing. And that was basically how I decided I wanted to get into publishing, because I had some stuff printed in these fanzines, and I was like, oh, I like that. I like that feeling of opening up and seeing my name, and seeing that I'd written something that someone else was going to read. So yeah, it was Doctor Who is so much part of my DNA and where I came from. That yeah, it's hard to avoid, and I have a bunch of Daleks constantly watching what I'm doing.
I'm familiar with. I've seen every episode, I think, of the when it came back, but
Mhm.
I've only made my way through a handful of original run of Doctor
Classics.
Who. But
Yeah.
yeah, I thought I would be, just from what other folks have told me and talked about it, who were big into Doctor Who. I thought Tom Baker would be a favorite of mine, and I really do like Tom Baker. But there's something about the John Pertwee,
Oh,
Doctor episodes that
yeah.
I really, really loved those. The couple that I've seen and been fortunate enough to check out. So
They're
it
very
is
of the
amazing.
time.
Yes, they are. It is amazing to think, like, starting out with fan fiction and submitting to those types of things, and where your career has gone since then, and the not just the creator owned stuff that you've done, but working in different areas, if it's Doctor Who or
Yeah.
if it's Star Wars. Is there any trick, or I guess skills or tactics that you've developed in terms of these things are science fiction, but they're very different, like in terms of horror or other elements. I think that some of the Doctor Who stuff tends to go a little bit into scary territory than, Star Wars, which I want to talk about because I know Star Wars Tales from the Nightlands is coming out now too, which is, kind of horror and Star Wars. But I guess to kind of get back to the question is it all just the same muscle when you're doing these types of things? Is there something that's quintessential, like Doctor Who sci-fi or Star Wars sci-fi, or is it's something else when you approach this material that you focus on?
I think it's the prism. It's the prism of how you see it, see it through. The interesting about both Who and Star Wars is they're not, in my mind, technically science fiction. They are more fantasy. Both Doctor Who is basically a wizard in space who has a magic wand. You can do all kinds of things and fights monsters. Star Wars is full of wizards with magic wands who fight monsters. There's both a lot more than that in so many ways. But actually, what both have is that they're not about the monsters and they're not about the wizardry and they're not about the magic spaceships or the police boxes or the lightsabers. They're about the people who wield them. And that's the same across everything. That's whether you're on board the Enterprise or whether you're flying a DeLorean back through time. We love the ships, we love the uniforms, we love the gadgets, we love the weapons. But actually what keeps us coming back is the characters. And I remember when I saw the trailer for the Force Awakens for the first one, and I don't know if you remember the first one, it was very much just based on vibe. You saw the Falcon, you saw all these different bits and bobs. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But it was the moment in the next trailer where you saw Han and Chewie going on board the Falcon and saying, Chewie, we're home. That's Star Wars. Because again, you care about those characters. And I think no matter what you're working on, no matter what universe you're working in, and working in licensed material like this, there is a particular skill set, not to sound too taken about it, but there is a particular skill set that you have to use to be able to work within a shared universe, especially a shared universe that is owned by someone else. But always it's the characters. Yeah, you can have the trappings, but it always comes back to the characters. So again, you come up with the story, you see what kind of stories these universes tell. Again, the other great thing about both Who and Star Wars is that you can have, they've just announced a Star Wars romance novel. There's been Doctor Who romance novels in the past. Both those universes, they can be taken everywhere. And we've seen it in Star Wars. You can have a Western. I think there's a lot of horror in Star Wars. There's a lot of monster movies in Star Wars. And I think, again, that's showing a lot of what Lucas loved. If you think back to the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, that's a horror film. You've got Luke literally hung upside down in a cave by a monster. And I think the original cut of it is even more of a horror film than the one you see when you see the monster and you see the slap and all that kind of thing. For me growing up, I was a monster kid. I'm sitting here wearing a famous monster t-shirt. Monsters were everything to me because of things like Doctor Who, because actually that's also what you remember. You remember the monsters, you remember the Daleks, you remember the Cybermen, you remember the Sontarans and all these creatures. It was the same for me with Star Wars. It was seeing, I talk about again, those periods when you move from one level of fandom to another. I was a little bit too young and nervous for Star Wars. I experienced Star Wars first in the comics, which is why I have an affinity for Jackson, the Big Green Rabbit, because he was literally the first thing I experienced in Star Wars, long before Luke Skywalker. So I read the comics before I saw the film. I was old enough and capable enough to cope with Empire when I went to see Empire in the cinema when it came out. But it was Return of the Jedi that made me a huge Star Wars fan. Because Return of the Jedi had Jabba's palace. Return of the Jedi had the Ewoks. Return of the Jedi had the Sarlacc pit. And so suddenly monsters are there in a way that in Empire Strikes Back, they're just not there. That you get a few, but there's not so many alien things in Empire. So yeah, for me, it was always monsters. So if you look at my take on a lot of these universes I work in, there is usually a monster involved in some way or another, because that's what resonates with me and always has. And it largely, again, comes from watching those things, going on to discover Hammer Horror, Universal, and, monster books of the 1970s and 80s. So yeah, I think I try and find those elements that I can tell stories within. And then your next job is to try and make it as authentically that thing as much as you can. One of the things I try to do is make it feel like it could have stepped out. If it's a episode of Doctor Who from a certain era, it has to feel like, for me, that it could be done at that time. Or it would have been done at that time. So yeah, I very much think about the era. Again, what the joy of these franchises are is that we now have franchises and stories that go over decades, so you can see where stories fit in and how the stories of that time would have been told. And I think that's when things like Andor are doing so well. Is it looks beautiful, but it could also have been filmed in the 70s in a lot of ways. So same with the new Alien show. It looks like something that came out in the 70s and 80s. Obviously, it looks something that's very modern at the same time, but it has that sensibility. So I'm trying to find ways to bring those sensibilities of the time and what it's like to be a kid watching those things for the first time. It's such a big part of who I am that I want to try and elicit that in other people as well.
Well, you certainly must be, well, you are like great at it because of all the things that you've done, not just with making comics or writing novels that feel like they are, part of whatever the original was that has, captured your attention. You are also very good at getting to the heart of these characters, which is kind of a good segue into Iron and Frost. I think it's your fourth miniseries with Marvel. It's part of, I think, the Age of Revelation storyline. How much work do you have to do on the front end to really figure out like who Frost and Stark are when you set about that this is what it is you're going to get? Like, have you done all that by the time you even like pitch an idea, or is it a long process?
I mean, the good thing is I've been researching these characters since I was 10. So, that's the joy of this. And I now want to go back and claim every comic I have ever bought as tax relief. But it was, yeah, I mean, I've grown up with Marvel comics. I got my first real experience of Marvel was from TV shows and in the 80s, the animated shows, reading Marvel UK comics, reading Secret Wars was the thing that blew it all open. We had a Secret Wars weekly over here where they would release the Secret Wars story that was in the States, but as a weekly strip, with backup strips, Alpha Fly in the background, weirdly in the backup story. And when it got to Secret Wars 2, they were very clever and they went back and sort of did when they had the tie-in issues, they reprinted a couple of issues beforehand, so you got the full story. So that was like a primer for the Marvel universe, and I've been there ever since. So, and luckily, I mean, again, when Iron Man Iron Man was one of those characters I've read pretty much consistently since the Silver Centurion days. So it's a character I know and I love. Again, Emma Frost with the X-Men. My X-Men knowledge goes in and out depending on which era we're in. I mean, in the early 90s, I was all in, an X-Men fan all the way through the Claremonts and 90s. So I perhaps have to do a little bit more work with Emma. So yeah, but you do treat it like research, so the good thing about when you're doing an event like Revelation, a lot of it is presented to you because they've worked out a general story, and you have it sounds derogatory to say it, but there's a shopping list of things the story has to do. So you get this story has to do this and this, and the challenge then is to make it its own thing as well. So with Iron and Frost, it plays a big part in the overall arcing story of how that event plays out. So I knew going in where it had to hit. Then the task becomes, finding some character moments in those, and both. I mean, by the time this goes out, I don't know if it's going out. Some people might have read it by then because it comes out this week. Both Tony and Emma are not in the state we usually see them. I mean, that's part of the big event. We're sort of like X number of years in the future after a cataclysmic event. So all the characters have been changed slightly. So it adds an added complication that you have to make them recognizably those characters, but they have also changed slightly. And in also, we also have War Machines in there, a major part in the story, and a new character as well. And we've got some side characters like Firestar, and some of the villains with people we've seen before. So yeah, there's a lot to play with. But you have got such a rich universe that and also you've got people there who will guide you. People like Tom know these characters backwards. So you put in some ideas and they go, yep, but that's fine. But what we need to do is how it do this. So they do guide you. So it's a special kind of work when you're dealing as part of a big event. The previous two I've done with Marvel were the Zombiote series and the Blood Hunt event. The first one I
Union
did
Jack
was
the Ripper.
Union Jack, which again was there was a lovely commission of that one because it was pretty much like it hasn't really got to talk to the main story other than the fact the vampires have won, and so what's Union Jack doing in the UK, which is the best thing you want to hear because actually you haven't got to worry so much about the bigger picture. You could just tell a really cool small story within that area, knowing Union Jack's history on fighting vampires. With Zombiotes, I was given the task of like, we need a book where the lore to the Zombiotes about, literally what kills them, what doesn't kill them, how do they work. It's a story that can be used as a primer for that. So that's your go. And every other thing part of that came from me. There was no idea what characters to use. There was no idea of like, I ended up using part of the Sinister Six and She-Hulk, and I would send something into the bar with no name. But none of that was in the brief. The only brief was this: you can have some Avengers, and this is the story you got to tell. You got to hit these points from a world building. So again, both of those had a great deal of freedom of what I actually did. Zombiotes, I basically pitched Shaun of the Dead, but sat in the bar with no name, with the Shocker because I love the Shocker. With this one, with Iron and Frost, there was definitely a more of like, right, we're nearer the action in this, so we need to. These are beats you need to hit, and they need to be really strong. So there was slightly less room to maneuver with this one, but at the same time, I could already see where the story could be in this one.
And you're working with Rory Coleman for this story.
Yes.
And
Great
I've
Rory
seen some of the
Coleman.
preview pages. I've seen some of the unlettered preview pages. They look amazing. So
he's incredible. He's so good. And it's been a real partnership, which I love. I love working with artists. And it was on some of the other, especially Union Jack, Cavin, who was the artist on that, brought so much sort of life to the world. And so a lot of the way the vampires work, a lot of that came from Cavin. With this one, as Rory was doing character takes and sketches, he was just, especially there's a new character we introduced. I think you see on the preview page is a young girl who's just discovered she's got mutant powers.
Right.
And we sort of see her development as being, her becoming a mutant with a name and all that good stuff. A lot of her relationships were there in the original idea, but then Rory said, but what if these two characters formed a relationship? And I was like, that's what it needed. And it was, so I love those moments because it was those moments when you as everyone says, and they should say, a script to a comic book isn't a blueprint. It's a guide. It's a map. It's like, this is what's going on in my head. How do we make this work? And that's what it should be. And then the artist gets that. A script should never be for the final reader. A script is for the editor and the artist. And then you work from that point on. And the stuff Rory has come back throughout and said, well, why don't we do this? And why don't we do that? And I've just been saying, yes, more, let's make this as much as our book as we can, because it always means that you get a better story. And his storytelling instinct is so good and so strong. I'd just love to keep working with him. I think this needs to be an ongoing, and we need to make it happen. But that might not be able to happen, but we'll see. But it's, I want to work with him again because he's just incredible.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Y'all, Jimmy, the Chaos Goblin strikes again. I should have known better than to mention I was working on my DC Universe meets Ravenloft hybrid D&D campaign on social media. My bad. He goes and tags a bunch of comics creators we know, and now I have to get it in gear and whip this campaign into shape so we can start playing. Another friend chimes in, are you going to make maps? It's fair to say it's been a while since I put something together, so I guess? ? It was then that I discovered Arkenforge. If you don't know who Arkenforge is, they have everything you need to make your TTRPG more fun and immersive, allowing you to build, play, and export animated maps, including in-person Fog of War capability that lets your players interact with maps as the adventure unfolds while you, the DM, get the full picture. Now I'm set to easily build high-res animated maps, saving myself precious time and significantly adding nuance to our campaign. That's a win every day in my book. Check them out at arkenforge.com and use the discount code YETI5 to get $5 off. I'll drop a link in the show notes for you. And big thanks to Arkenforge for partnering with our show. I think I'm going to make Jimmy play a Goblin Warlock just to get even.
Welcome back.
I'm always kind of amazed at the amount of work that goes into any type of event, whether it's Marvel or DC. It is just unbelievable all the moving parts that have to come together to tell a story in the main title, and then all of the other pieces and how all of that works, like the inside baseball of it all, as to how it all happens, it all works together. It really is fascinating, and when you see it done very well, which Marvel, this Age of Revelation storyline seems to be another one that has a lot of moving parts to it. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, and I've even like the cover work for Iron and Frost. They all look great, so
Incredible.
I'm very
Yeah.
excited to see.
It's been so one of the other projects I've worked on a lot over the last few years, and people probably know me for, is Star Wars: The High Republic, and so I sort of I saw it from the other side as well. I saw it from being part of the initial core group of people who came up with that idea, and then seeing it. I mean, I think I can't remember the exact figures, but we worked out that in 4 years we did 26 novels, 137 comics, audio dramas, 2 TV shows. It's ridiculous to see the amount of work. I mean, that we had to do as the sort of the core writing team to keep everything consistent, but just the wider the editors and the the continuity experts and all those things to keep everything together and keep everything moving on. Um, and I think you look back at every big event like that, and the stuff with High Republic, I go, that didn't quite link up. But you go, actually, considering what we did, there was always going to be some things that might bump up against each other and that kind of thing. But the people who keep these, these wagons on the road, when you've got all these different moving parts and all of these different creators, it's incredible. And hats off to them, because I've been an editor. I know what it's like to be an editor. To be an editor on part of an event, I don't even want to think about it. It's like, that sounds like chaos to me, and I'm very happy to be on the writing side of it.
Yeah, it does sound like chaos.
Mm.
I would like to do something, a trivia show maybe, where we pit continuity experts against each other. That seems like a Herculean task to
No. But then you get the
for
fun stuff as well. Then you get the moments when you realize you made a mistake. And if you're still in the event, like we were in the High Republic, there were a couple of points when we went, oh, one character's in 2 places. That can't happen, can it? And then you go, well, actually you can, because he's in a more amorphous form of jelly that's forced himself into suits. So what he's done is split himself to do 2 things. And that's why he's on 2 different planets. And then you come up with and it literally, that's what happened in the High Republic. We had one character appear in 2 comics and 2 battles that happened at the same time, and we just completely missed it, because no matter how many times you try and catch everything, there's always going to be something to get through. And fans immediately notice it. Obviously, they immediately go. So we then had this entire thing that this character, Oberlin, who was this amorphous blob of green goo, we worked out when he can separate himself, and he's doing an experiment, and it became part of his story. So it's actually worked really well in the end. It worked when we came to the final battle. He had been diminished by all these times that he'd split himself off, and the other beings were getting killed. So he was getting smaller and smaller, literally. And so it really worked in our favor from a story point of view, because suddenly he was in a risky situation he wouldn't have been before, because we'd made a mistake. And I think sometimes as writers, we want to appear, oh yeah, we planned everything, and we do plan a lot, especially when you're working on an event. A load of stuff has to be planned, otherwise the wheels are off the wagon. But there will always be those moments when you go, oh no, okay, then this is how we fix it. And those are the fun bits, and that's when I get my old editor's head on, when I go, okay, right, we've got a situation, we need to move quickly to work out how it works. And they're actually sometimes the most creative moments, because you start putting things together that were never meant to be together, and somehow it works.
How are you as a fan, being a fan of all these things when it comes to continuity? Are you someone like as a kid and growing up where you were a stickler for continuity? Or I
It's a
think I
tough
used to
one.
be, but the older I've gotten, the more, I understand a little bit how the process works, and I
Yeah,
just care more for a good story. I try not to get bogged down, but I certainly understand folks that are,
yeah,
that's the thing for them. So how
yeah.
about
I
you?
mean, it's interesting, because again, coming from where the fandom I originally came from, with Doctor Who, there is no canon in Doctor Who. There can't be canon in Doctor Who. I was part of me and George Mann, who was another one of the writers of the Republic, we'd been hired by the BBC to write the definitive in-universe history of the Daleks, which sounds amazing, and someone who has all these up, it's an amazing thing to do. We worked out there are 3 origin stories for the Daleks, and they all had to be true. So thank God for Time Wars. That's all I'm going to say. But Doctor Who, in its nature, because the way it was developed, it didn't have an ongoing continuity. I mean, the Doctor's background changed depending on what they needed him to do, and it's continued to evolve and change. I think also it was created at a time where people could never watch these things again anyway, so they didn't think it would matter. The fact that the Daleks are three origin stories, no one, that was from like 10 years ago. No one would care about that. That's black and white. I think it's become more and more important to fans, and it's become more and more important to shows as well. But I'm sort of, I don't know. I love as much as anyone working out, how things all work together. And I think that's actually probably why I like doing my job, because I am one of those fans who would sit there and go, well, how can the Enterprise be there if it's also over there? So how can, and trying to work out, there's a great run that DC Comics did with Star Trek set between Star Trek 3 and 4, which then they had to completely unwrite because they realized Star Trek 4 was taking place like 5 minutes after the end of Star Trek 3. And they'd given Kirk a new ship, and they'd got Spock back, and he had the Excelsior, and they suddenly had to get them back to Vulcan and give them another bird of prey. And so I loved that, because I loved seeing the convoluted leaps they had to then work out to get Kirk and Spock back to Vulcan, and wipe Spock's brain again because he'd been fine for the last year. And that really tickles me, and I love those little moments. I love the working out, and most of the fan fiction I wrote when I was a kid and a fan was explaining things that happened in between episodes, and why a Dalek suddenly changed to look like that Dalek, and that kind of thing. So I'm a bit loosey-goosey with canon, but I still want it to be, I never want to pull someone out the story. So that's be a reason why the canon's not important. But at the same point, I don't want it to be such a, there's Terrence Dicks, who was one of these script editors, and Robert Holmes, script editor on Doctor Who, used to say, don't let, continuity get in the way of a good story. And I think as long as you're respectful to the fact that people love continuity and they want it all to work, I think if you treat it well and treat it with respect, then people will go with it. And sometimes there are those big catastrophic moments where Canon has to reboot again because someone else has bought the company and all those kind of things. And I get why people are very invested. For me, I am very much of the mindset, well, that still exists in my head. There's part of the world where all of that still works. And I'm not just talking about Star Wars, because this has happened on so many different franchises. I mean, again, I'm a DC Comics fan. How many times has the DC universe restarted?
Yeah, a lot.
All those two men literally exist somewhere. And so I think part of the fun is making everything mashed together. I understand why people get very angry, but at the same time, I'm like, but that's where the fun is. It's like working out and reintroducing and like having those little nods and winks at the audience. So I love it. But also, I will be the one who'll be watching something and, well, we can't do that. No. But then I have to work it through my system because I realize what I sound like.
And so in terms of Iron and Frost, with the miniseries and how it all fits in, it's 3 issues. Is that right?
Yeah. Majority of those tie-ins to events are now 3 issues, which actually works quite well from a traditional 3-act structure kind of thing. But it's that seems to be the norm now with these big events, that the event minis are 3 issues.
When it comes time, to get involved with something like that, and if it's like Tom Brevoort or whomever, reaches out to you, or you connect with them, do they give you like options of things you can pitch on, or did Tom come to you and say, hey, I think you'll be good for, Iron and Frost?
Oh no, I mean, it's literally, you're invited to work on that title, or invited to pitch on that title. And depending on some of the jobs I've done in the past, Transformers Back to the Future crossover, I was one of 5, I think, people pitching for it. And we all had the same brief. And then they chose the one that they liked. Doesn't so much work with that with people who are at the big two, because they haven't got the time to necessarily do that. So they will come to you, and the recent Gwenpool mini I did was a good example of that. That came to me and it had a very strict brief. This is what is happening. How are you going to make it work? So they didn't have the end. No, they didn't have the ending that we had, but they knew at certain points this is what needs to happen, because it obviously has bearings on other things as well. So a lot of the time, you don't often get a chance, unless I think you're above my pay grade, to go, I'm going to pitch for Superman now, because those plans are all in motion. Quite often the conversation you have is, what characters do you like? What kinds of stories do you resonate with you? And then they think, oh, hang on. So Iron and Frost came about because Danny Kazim, who's the sort of the editor of the book, we worked together on High Republic. We'd worked together on Union Jack. And when he got the list of the stories that came through, he was like, oh, I know, that's a Cav story. So, he knew that it'd be the kind of story that I would like doing. So yeah, it usually happens. It's a weird thing to, because obviously we talk about pitch and things, but you're usually pitching to a brief. And so it's that weird thing of, like, at times where readers, and I've done it as a reader, going, well, why did they pitch that? It was like, well, there was no pitching involved in that part of the story. That part of the story was a given from the off, because it's like, for example, I never pitched Gwen Stacy coming back as a Wolverine. That was part of that was part of my brief for Gwen.
Okay.
Because that's what happens. Because again, you're working in a bigger universe. You're working in a universe where they have building blocks of what they're doing. They have an ongoing storyline. You may have no idea what that ongoing storyline is, but you're filling this part of that story. So yeah, it can be a dance sometimes to sort of like try and tell the story you're comfortable with, you want to tell. And sometimes they can't tell you why. I mean, I had so many cases on Star Wars where I pitched the beginning of Rogue One without by accident once, because I had a brief and I was like, oh, this happens, and there's this kid and she's on a planet when the Imperials come, and then she's like, and they're going, you can't do that. I was like, why not? Can't tell you. And then I literally went to see Rogue One, and I came out and texted the editors going, now I know why I couldn't do that entire first quarter of my book, because I've just watched it on screen. And they were going, yeah, we just couldn't say why. We just had to tell you, come up with a new front of the book. So I was like, oh, okay. And it happens so many times because, again, these universes are so big and there's so many moving parts for the people working on them from inside. They can't tell everyone everything, what's happening, because they haven't got time. They haven't got the... Right. And also, as a writer, you don't necessarily need to know. Just like real life, we don't really need to know what's everything else is going on in the world. You just need to know what your story is. So it could be frustrating at times. It can be really liberating at times. Again, it all depends on the project.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to go through some of the other stuff that you have coming out, so listeners know. Gwenpool #5 just came out September 3rd. Star Wars Tales from the Nightlands #1 was out September 10th. You have a story in I think it's a demon story in DC's Satanic Panic out October 1st. Star Wars: The Jaws of Jakku, which is an audio drama.
That's right.
Is out October 9th. Star Wars: The High Republic Fear of the Jedi. A trade paperbacks out October 14th. Iron and Frost #1 and 2 out October 15th, and then November 12th, and then Star Wars Tales from the Nightlands #2 out October 22nd. If we could, I just wanted to ask you a little bit in terms of Tales from the Nightlands, and
sure.
I totally agree with what you were saying about Star Wars. There are definitely some horror elements, on Hoth with the Wampa, which I think I have my Wampa from when I was a kid right behind me in my office, is a horror story. And I mean, Star Wars is such a big universe to play in, whether or not it's the original trilogy or the sequels or the High Republic era. But I'm more interested in terms of your influences in horror. Like, you're wearing the classic, you said you're wearing like a famous monster shirt. I know it's October right now as we record this. Yes, wonderful Frankenstein on the shirt, or Frankenstein's monster. So what are your influences in terms of horror that you then take into Star Wars with you?
So the Tales from the Nightlands is an interesting thing, because I've been doing those books for nearly 10 years now with different titles. So these are anthology titles first working with IDW and now with Dark Horse. Sort of all age Halloween fright comics that all originated between me and Mike Siglain, who's the creative director of publishing at Lucasfilm. We both grew up on Universal and Hammer. And so we were sitting at San Diego Comic Con, say 2017, and we were like, oh, wouldn't it be great to do a story where we could do Count Dooku as a vampire? You know, what could we do a story where Tarkin was creating a monster on the Death Star? And we sort of looked at each other and I went, well, you do realize you're the creative director of Lucasfilm Publishing. So could we make this happen? And so we looked at things like Treehouse of Terror and EC Comics and all those kind of things. We went, well, hang on, you could, because the wonderful world of Star Wars is that a lot of the time you have canon, getting back to that original conversation, then you have legends, which are the stories that the people in canon tell about the characters they know. So this original idea came up and we did Tales from Vader's Castle. We did about 3 or 4 series of it, where it was people having an adventure, and while they're having an adventure, they're relating, as you do when you're being chased by Darth Vader. You relate that thing you remember hearing about Count Dooku. You know, it's that kind of thing, telling stories around a fire. So you could have all the, I mean, they let me retell the Wicker Man, but with Ewoks. I wanted to call it the Wicket Man, but it was too early in the Ewoks' life. It's very upsetting. But you know, so we
Great
could have
title,
all those
though.
moments. I know. I'm
The
still
Wicked Man is a great title.
You know, but Robert Hagg did the art. If you've not seen it, Google Ewok Wicker Man, and it's amazing. It is literally what it sounds like. Do these stories, which are, you know, what the kind of nightmare stories? What would Luke and Leia have heard? You know, being tucked up to bed on Alderaan or Tatooine. What kind of horror stories would they have been told by their uncles, aunties, parents, whatever? And so that's what this became. It became this chance to tell Halloween type stories featuring characters and do things. You know, we've had Were-Gamorreans, we've turned C-3PO into a zombie droid. You know, we've done lots of great fun things. And it all comes from that sort of monster kid background of like loving classic horror films, seeing them as a little bit of sort of gateway, not just for younger fans. We try to make it that they are a bit scary at points. We wanted it to be a book that people could read together as families, you know, so you could show it to your kid. They could, because their kids being like being scared. We all know this. We all try and protect them, but they love horror because that's all they've read pretty much all their life. It's just the nice things, you know. It's look at stories about Roald Dahl, Goosebumps, all these kind of things. I mean, they're just horror films, but just for kids. It gave us a chance to do that. This is our latest version of it, so slightly different. We've changed the format up, but we've got 3 sort of standalone horror movies, a trilogy of horror movies, one set in each of the trilogies. So you start with Anakin and Obi-Wan. The second issue is Luke and Leia. The third one is Leia and Rey and Finn. So, and we've created a sort of a bogeyman that they experience every 30 years. A bogeyman returns. So it just happens to work that every 30 years or whatever is pretty much where we are at this point. So yeah, it's a chance to sort of say to kids, you love Star Wars, you love monsters. Well, do you know what? In the same way, for me, Doctor Who was my gateway to so many other universes and so many other genres. If you like scary things, then you might like these other things out there as well. So it's definitely part of that tradition of going, there is spooky season. Let's take a step into a larger and probably more terrifying world.
Oh, I love that. And I saw some of the preview from issue 1. I think you're working with Sue Lee. Just amazing. She's been on the podcast before talking about a couple of things, and just absolutely lovely and wonderful artist. So
yeah, amazing.
Just before I let you go, I just wanted to check in terms of, you're involved in, you know, so many different things. You have a pretty packed October and other, you know, a bunch of stuff coming out.
Yeah.
What is it you do to kind of, you know, relax or recharge creatively? Do you have time where you're like, oh, I just need to sit and watch, you know, Great British
haven't
Bake
made
Off,
time for it, so I've started to make time, because the one thing, the High Republic was amazing. It did nearly kill me and everyone else working on it, because it was so intensive, and in some ways it saved us because we had to launch it in pandemic, and so many reasons why that was a blessing in the end to work on something like that. But it did take over our lives, as well as then trying to do it our own things as well on top of it. So yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question because it's something we don't talk about very much. That's sort of like trying to find a creative venture, because at the end of the day, we're all creators. That's what we do. It's what we get joy from. It's quite hard when I joke about my to-do list being the same now as when I was 10. Yes, it's funny, it's joke, it's actually really true. But the trouble is, it's really hard to switch off. It's really hard to go and watch a horror film or a science fiction film. I mean, there's some franchises that I haven't worked on, but I still sit there and analyze everything they're doing, you know. So I've found in the last year I've been doing lino printing, when you carve lino and then you print it, very old traditional printing. I found a place in Bristol here in the UK that teaches it every Wednesday. So for a Wednesday, for a couple of hours, I'm sat in a studio with other people carving a piece of lino, which I will then do some printing from. And it's finding those moments. It's finding those moments where I've maintained to myself, I promised myself, that is not there to make profit. It's not there to make content for anything. Sometimes I do take a picture of what I'm doing and put it on Instagram with it, but that's not the reason I'm doing it. The reason I'm doing it is to just make something for me. And so yeah, that's definitely, it's finding that avenue you can still be creative, and also find other avenues when it's not related to your job at all. I'm a football fan, a soccer fan, like a lot of people in the UK. I have a local team. When I go and watch them lose on a weekend, they do win sometimes. For those 90 minutes, I don't think about story arcs or whether spaceships work or all these kind of things. For those 90 minutes, I'm there with my daughter and I'm yelling at 11 men on a pitch kicking a football. So that is, again, it's those kind of things when you ended up, and so many of us end up doing this job because we love these worlds and because we love being a fan and we love comics, but it does make it quite hard sometimes to switch off, and the boundaries become so blurred. So it is a case of finding, whether it's sport, whether it's a hobby, whether it's bird watching, whether it's going for big walks over the moors, or doing something like lino printing or pottery or whatever. It's something, again, that's just for the joy of doing that thing. That's the trick, because otherwise your brain does explode after a while.
And that sounds bad. The brain exploding thing. Well, I did want to say, as someone that gets your newsletter, I did see, I think you posted not that long ago, one of your most recent lino printings. And
yeah, I mean, it's kind of, but I'm not.
Thought it was wonderful.
Thank you. And but the thing is, that's not so much me. Again, there's stuff there that I will put in just because I'm particularly proud of it or whatever. But it's a different thing to pitching to posting something about work. It's more of me just going, here's something I made. And it's not part of my professional life. It's just something that I do, and if I'm proud of it, so there's loads of stuff I do in that I will never show anyone, mainly because it hasn't worked. But it's meditation. For those 2 hours a week, there was a period of time over the summer where I couldn't do it. I missed the enrollment time on the class. I got the days wrong. So by the time I went in to pay my money to sign up for the next 6 weeks, the place is all gone. And I was like, oh, I'll do it at home instead. I've got all the kit. On a Wednesday, I will find those 2 hours and I will sit there on those 2 hours. I never did it once, because there's something about going to the place and going to the brilliant coffee shop and having a cake beforehand and sitting down and working with, it's a nice class made up of some people who go every time and some newcomers who just do it for one semester and then move on. And there's something about that place is somewhere where I'm not Cavan Scott writer. I'm not Cavan Scott who's worked on Star Wars or Marvel. I'm Cavan Scott who's mucking up this print, who's like, can't work out how to do the line round, or is having to ask advice or helping someone else. And I think that's what you need to do. You need to find those moments where you don't have to be on, and you don't have to be, because when your job and your hobby become the same thing anyway, there are no boundaries. So you have to find something that you can then ring fence.
I thought it was pretty interesting. I didn't really know about the lino printing, but no, it is. It's important. It's a good way to put it. When your hobby kind of becomes your job, you have to figure out something.
I mean, typically all the lino prints I'm doing are monsters. I mean, I tried one that's a hare, which was great and it worked. But so far I've done Godzilla, I've done Nosferatu. I'm doing one at the minute which might be on this t-shirt.
So everything, that's the one I saw.
everything I've done is pretty much into my eyes, just because everyone's going, I'm going to do these wonderful landscapes, I'm going to do these wonderful flowers, I'm going to do these animals, and I was going, I'm going to do Godzilla. So it's still there. It's still very much part of who I am. It's my,
Yeah.
And my teacher there is loving it because she said no one has ever come in and done a Godzilla print for the first one they've ever done. So, but again, it's like it's a way of keeping in touch with your interests, but in a different way. I mean, again, it's like it's nothing. I wouldn't. It sends a different part of your brain off, and so yeah, it's great. That's my advice to any creative: is get a hobby that has nothing to do with your job because you need it.
Awesome. Well, Cavin, I thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Listeners, Iron and Frost #1 will be out October 15th. Star Wars Tales from the Nightlands is going to be out. The first one, I think, came out September 10th. The second one will be out October 22nd. And I think over in the UK, it seems like audio dramas are a lot bigger than in the US, although podcasts are certainly very popular. But,
Yeah.
Check out, I think it's The Jaws of Jakku.
Jaws of Jakku. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Cavin, thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks for
So
having me.
much. Huge fan. And listeners, if you haven't read any of Cavin's work before, which I'm not sure how that's possible, but just for my own, I would recommend the Transformers Back to the Future crossover. If you're
If you can
like
find
me,
it these days, because it's
Yeah.
not available anywhere. But yeah, find one, please.
if you can find it, that's wonderful. As well as the High Republic comics, and then I really loved Shadow Service that you did with Core and Hal at Vault. I have both of those volumes, and it's that's a phenomenal series. I love that mix of kind of spy with supernatural stuff is great. So
Oh, thank you. That's my baby, Shadow Service. I mean, it's that thing of like, you work on so many universes and then you do your own, and it's a different kind of feeling. Shadow Service, people ask me all the time, it is coming back. We said at the last volume, Shadow Service will return, obviously ripping off James Bond. But it will. It's just finding Corin's really popular and really busy. So we're just trying to go, Corin, draw Shadow Service. But she's off doing Lilith, which is amazing, and loads of other things. So yeah, the plan is for us to finish off that saga sooner rather than later, hopefully. So Shadow Service will
Awesome.
return.
Good. I'm glad. I really love that. Love that series. So, yeah, listeners, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Shout out to my brother Bobby, the Cryptid Creator Corner's #1 most dedicated fan. Bobby listens to all my episodes. He's also a big fan of the Star Wars High Republic stuff. Shout
Thanks,
out,
Bobby.
So hey, Bob, and yeah, Cavin, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, listeners. Rate, review us, tell us to do all those things they tell you to do about podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Good night.
This is Byron O'Neill, one of your hosts of the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by Comic Book Yeti. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It lets us know how we're doing, and more importantly, how we can improve. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner, maybe you would enjoy our sister podcast, Into the Comics Cave. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.